Frank drove 400 miles for Thanksgiving and understood in 10 seconds that he was no longer welcome. No hug, no warmth, just a polite smile and a house that had already replaced him. He didn't argue. He didn't stay the night. By sunrise, Frank was back on the road, and by the end of that week, he would decide who inherited everything he'd built. Frank stood there, holding a paper bag that smelled of fresh bread. The warm air from her house hit his face. Clean, expensive, too perfect. And for a second, he almost stepped back, as if the place itself didn't want him in it. Claire crossed her arms, the smile half built, half forced. Behind her, a man's voice called out, "Who's that?" "Dad," she said, still looking at Frank. Then louder, "It's my dad." Trent appeared from the hallway wearing a sweater that probably cost more than Frank's truck. "Well, look who made it," he said, the tone somewhere between a joke and a warning. Frank stepped inside, wiped his boots on the mat that read welcome, though it didn't sound like an invitation. The place smelled like candles and plastic pine. Not a trace of turkey, not even coffee. He placed the bread on the counter and waited for someone to say, "We're glad you came." No one did. Claire brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You could have flown, you know." Frank nodded. "Truck runs fine." Trent chuckled. "Still that old Ford? Still gets me where I need to go." Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind tapped at the glass. Frank looked around. White walls, chrome fixtures, no pictures. Not of him, not of her mother. Just empty frames filled with design. He tried to lighten the air. "Brought some photos, thought you might want a few." Claire didn't look up. "Maybe later, Dad. We're keeping things pretty minimal now." Trent poured himself wine. "Minimal's the trend, Pops." Frank smiled the way a man does when he's not sure what else to do. The bread sat untouched. His jacket still hung on one shoulder, like he might just leave it there and turn back to the road. The laughter that followed some joke he didn't hear filled the room like static. He waited for it to fade, for someone to notice he hadn't joined in. No one did. He looked at the clock on the wall. It ticked without sound, battery smooth, cold. He'd driven 400 miles for that silence. Trent carved the turkey like it was a performance. Every slice came with a comment. "Dark meat for the traditionalists. Hope your dentures are up for this, Frank." Laughter followed, polite and sharp. Claire sipped her wine, eyes fixed on her phone. Frank kept his fork steady. The plate looked perfect. Cranberries, stuffing, all the colors, but nothing smelled like home. The food was too clean, the table too quiet between jokes. "So, Dad," Trent said, chewing with an open smile. "Still in that old house out west?" "Still there," Frank replied. "Roof needs work." Trent grinned. "Maybe sell it while it still stands. Market's crazy good right now." Claire chimed in, softer. "Trent means it could be nice to move closer. There's retirement places near here, really modern." Frank nodded, though something behind his eyes stiffened. "I built that house myself." Trent leaned back. "Sure, but that was, what, before the internet." He laughed again, too loud. Forks clicked. The sound was small, but sharp enough to cut through the air. Frank's hand trembled when he reached for his glass. He steadied it with the other, pretending not to notice. Claire stood to refill her drink. "Want some wine, Dad?" "Water's fine." She poured anyway, half a glass, placed it too close to his plate. The smell hit him first, expensive, unfamiliar. He stared at it for a moment, then moved it aside. "Still baking?" she asked, almost kindly. "Sometimes," he said. "Mostly bread." Trent smirked. "Of course. You look like a bread guy." Another laugh. It didn't sound mean until it echoed in the silence afterward. Frank chewed, slow and quiet. The knife in his hand paused midair, heavier than it should have been. His eyes moved across the room. No old photos, no warmth, no trace of the life he once gave her. Just marble, glass, and the low hum of a house that had erased him. When dinner ended, Claire kissed his cheek like a stranger saying goodbye to a guest. Trent cleared the plates before Frank had finished his last bite. In the kitchen doorway, Frank stood still for a long time, coat over his arm. He realized he'd already started leaving. The highway was empty when he left before sunrise. Frost covered the truck's windshield, a thin white film that cracked when he wiped it with his sleeve. The house behind him was still dark. No one waved. No porch light flicked on. He drove slow at first, hands steady on the wheel, bread still on the seat beside him, untouched. The sky shifted from black to gray, then pale gold, but it didn't warm much. The radio played static until a country song cut through, something about going home. He turned it off. The silence sat heavier than the noise. At a gas station 2 hours south, he filled the tank and poured himself burnt coffee from a silver pot. The clerk, a young man with tattoos on his hands, asked if he was heading home for the holidays. Already did, Frank said. The kid nodded, didn't ask more. Back in the truck, he opened the wooden box on the passenger seat. Inside, old photos. Claire on a swing, her mother laughing behind the camera, their first house half built with his hammer still in frame. The corners were soft from years of handling. He flipped through them, one by one, until his hands stilled. The air inside the cab felt cold, but his chest burned. For a long time, he just sat there, looking at the same picture. Claire at 5, flour on her nose, holding a tiny loaf of bread they'd baked together. The heater clicked on and filled the silence with its tired hum. "That's enough," he whispered. The words came out calm, not bitter, just done. He closed the box, set it back on the seat, and started the engine. This time, the truck moved faster. By the time he reached the ridge, sunlight flashed across the dashboard. He could see for miles. Empty road, dry grass, the faint outline of a town far ahead. Frank didn't look back. The decision was already made, though no one else would know it yet. The next call he made wouldn't be to his daughter. It would be to his attorney. The pen clicked twice before he started signing. Frank sat across from his attorney in a small office that smelled like old paper and weak coffee. The window behind the desk faced a parking lot half covered in snow. Outside, a plow scraped by with a hollow metal groan. The lawyer, an old friend named Mitchell, adjusted his glasses. "You sure about this, Frank?" Frank nodded once. "Completely." Mitchell turned the pages slowly, careful not to smudge the ink. "You want to exclude her entirely? Even future descendants?" "That's right," Frank said. "Put it in plain words. I don't want it softened." Mitchell sighed through his nose, but kept writing. The only sound after that was the tap-tap of Frank's pen against the table, steady, patient, final. He read the clauses line by line, eyes moving without hesitation. The estate, workshop, and savings shall be directed to the Rural Apprenticeship Fund. He imagined the kids who'd get those tools, those chances. They'd never met him, but they'd know what it meant to build something and finish it right. Mitchell slid the last page toward him. "Sign here and here." Frank leaned forward, his hand shaking only slightly. The pen scratched the paper, one name, then another. He exhaled, almost quietly enough to miss. Tap, tap. The lid snapped shut. When it was done, he stood up slower than he used to. "Mail me a copy," he said. Mitchell hesitated. "She'll be shocked, Frank." "She already was," he said. "Just didn't notice." Outside, the wind pushed hard against the door as he stepped back into the cold. The sky was flat and white, the kind that swallows sound. He sat in his truck, started the engine, and let the heater groan to life. The phone rang before he pulled out of the lot. Claire's name lit up the screen. For a second, he almost answered. Then it stopped, and Trent's number appeared instead. Frank watched it blink twice before hitting ignore. A minute later, a message came through. "Need help with a down payment. Pops. Call me back." He looked at it, smiled once, and whispered, "Ask the bank." Then he drove home. The lawyer read the letter in a voice that didn't belong to him. The office was quiet except for the sound of paper sliding against the desk. Claire sat across from him, her coat still on, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Trent leaned back in his chair, leg bouncing, pretending to be bored. Mitchell cleared his throat. "This is Mr. Delaney's statement, attached to the will." The first line made her flinch. "To my daughter, I drove 400 miles once to see you." Trent smirked faintly. Guess he really wanted to make that point stick. Mitchell kept reading. "It's a long way to go to learn that love doesn't live where pride does. So I left what I built to people who still build. You taught me that family isn't blood, it's gratitude." The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't move. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded finished. Like he'd already forgiven her, just not the way she wanted. Trent exhaled sharply. "So that's it. He gives everything to strangers? Apprentices?" Mitchell nodded. "To a vocational fund, yes. Fully legal, fully binding." Claire's voice cracked when she finally spoke. He didn't even say goodbye. Mitchell looked down. He thought he had. Outside, wind pressed against the window. The blinds rattled softly, like faint applause or the sound of something being closed for good. Trent stood first, muttering under his breath, but Claire stayed seated. Her eyes lingered on the folded letter, on her father's careful handwriting. The loops steady, deliberate. She traced one with her finger, as if that could undo it. When she finally rose, she took the letter with her, not to keep, but because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. By the time she reached the parking lot, snow had started falling, thin, soft flakes that disappeared on contact. Across town, in Frank's old workshop, the lights were off. Tools hung in perfect order. His truck sat outside, dusted white, still and waiting. The wind moved along the siding, steady, unbroken, and one loose hinge clicked once, like a final nod. Just the sound of a man's last choice, still holding.